Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Tottenham Way. I'm Tom Barclay from The Sun. I'm joined by Tom Allnutt of The Times. And we have both watched Spurs pretty thrilling in the end 2-2 draw with Man United today at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I say thrilling in the end because for about 84 minutes, I don't think it was completely not reminiscent, I suppose, phrase that slightly strangely, to the final in Bilbao. It wasn't exactly a thriller, and then suddenly out of nowhere, it exploded into life, and all hell broke loose with 3 goals in the final 6 minutes plus added time. Spurs thought they'd won it, having come from behind when Richarlison scored in the 90 plus 1 minutes, but then obviously Matthijs De Ligt had a sting in the tail in the 6th minute of injury time to secure probably maybe a fair result of a draw, but very much a frustrating result in the end for Spurs teams. They thought they had it. Tom, before we sort of get into the specifics, your overall thoughts, and as a Spurs fan, were you left really frustrated, or did you think maybe, even though it was disappointing to concede right at the end, perhaps a fair result?
Hi, Tom. We're recording sort of 9:30 here PM on Saturday night. And I actually think it's sort of one of those matches where it's not a bad thing to have had a little bit of, even just a few hours to stew a bit. We both sort of came back with the intention of going to a fireworks party. Only one of us made it. I didn't. But just kind of having that time, I think, because I feel like coming out of the stadium, there was no doubt that you would leave as a Spurs fan feeling incredibly disappointed, and I think you could see that even in the reaction of the players on the pitch afterwards. It's funny, isn't it, football, how just the chronology of events affects the feeling at the end. You know, I mean, the Spurs players were gutted. You know, they were wandering around the middle. 2 or 3 of the players were sort of down on their knees at the end. Meanwhile, the United players were over in the corner and the fans were absolutely buzzing, weren't they, to get that late goal. And literally 10 minutes before, in the 83rd minute, United were 1-0 up. And if Spurs had scored a late equaliser, if they'd scored an equaliser in the 96th minute and had been 1-1, then the whole stadium would have erupted and it would have been a very different feeling. So I think, in a way, of course, at full time, to have got so close, I think, to what would have been a real feel-good victory, those kind of last-gasp wins, and particularly to turn it around, to be 1-0 down and to have won 2-1 against Man United, going into the international break, of course, kind of breaking the sort of the home hoodoo at the moment. I think all of those things would have been really important and really satisfying. You can't get away from that. And I think it was careless. I do think it was careless to throw it away, and maybe we'll get into that. But I think with a few hours just to kind of zoom out on it, I do think it was a decent result. I think before the game, and I was talking to a few Spurs fans before and after the match, and they were really saying the same thing. They would have taken a point. Going into the match, I think, given the context, given the recent form at home, and given where Man United are at the moment in terms of their momentum, I think Spurs would have taken a draw. But clearly, when you get yourself into that position where they were, I think, they should have held on. But that's how it is. I actually think overall it was a fair result. And I think that's also the other thing to think about is actually Man United were the better team, I thought, in the first half. I thought overall Spurs were the better side in the second half. United had a bit of a spell for a while where Spurs kind of lost a bit of pressure. But I think a point was a fair reflection of the game. What did you think?
Yeah. Yes, that is what I think. And I think we'll get into fan expectation and frustration, specifically around the Xavi Simons substitution a little bit later. But I wanted to start off with Frank's team selection to begin with, and kind of following on from what you were saying about Man United being quite good and sort of much improved from the team that Spurs faced in that Europa League final, and most of the times they played them last season. Obviously, Spurs won all 4 of their games last season against United. But you can tell the improvements that Ruben Amorim has overseen. I mean, he had to be fair, how bad they were towards the end of last season. And when you spend as much money as they have on some clearly quality players, I thought Bryan Mbeumo looked every bit as the complete winger that Thomas Frank sort of talked him up before the game on the Friday. Matheus Cunha is clearly a class act. I still think Benjamin Sesko is finding his feet, and hopefully from a United perspective, he'll improve from there. But they've got some good players, and Amad Diallo I thought looked very good. He's clearly a prospect, and it was interesting afterwards. Frank was talking about United being in flow, I think was the phrase he said. You could tell that they're in a good moment, such as the sort of modern phrasing of football. They are in a good moment, aren't they? That's 5 games unbeaten now. They're clearly not invincible, but they're definitely a lot better than last season. But to take it to the team selection, I do
It was interesting, Tom, just to pick up on that before we get into the selection time. I thought it was interesting in the press conferences that Amorim really came out of it kind of saying, I thought we should have won, and didn't seem to be happy with the point. I thought Frank, conversely, was fairly satisfied to have taken the point. I think he was obviously disappointed, and he admitted that. But I think he, of the two managers, I think was much the happier with the kind of the result, which I think just offers a little clue really as to where these two teams are at the moment. I think in terms of their kind of trajectory more than anything else. Like, I think they're very similar in terms of their results and where they are on the table and their ambitions for the season. And there wasn't really much between them in this game, I think. But I think United feel a bit more, feel further along. I was going to say complete there, but they're really not complete. But they feel further along in this kind of process. They look more like an Amorim team, right? There's more of a strong identity there. They've obviously made some big signings in the summer. Spurs are almost a little bit where kind of United were last season, in the sense of kind of trying to develop a stronger sense of who they are, what they're trying to be, and the identity of the team. And I just picked that up in the 2 press conferences. I didn't know if you felt that Amorim was really frustrated. He basically kind of said, we were too comfortable, didn't he? We got too complacent. Yeah. We should have sensed the environment. The game was there to win. Whereas I think Frank was a little bit more like taking the positives out of the result. And I thought that was an interesting thing from the 2 presses after the game.
Yeah, I agree. But also, in fairness to Frank, they are further along in their project. I mean, Amorim's been there. It'll be a year actually on the 11th that he will have officially started at United. Obviously, Frank's way less time than that, and has come in and he's going for a completely different style, whether you agree with it or not, from what came before him, and it's going to take time to change it, clearly. But what I found interesting and probably a bit frustrating to a certain extent, and I know he would push back on it, is once again, to my mind, he set his team up both in personnel, mainly in personnel, to with the first thought being to stop the opposition rather than try and break them down and go on the attack. Again, with the full knowledge, obviously, that they've come from a team that have conceded goals for fun last season under Ange, and he's trying to change that. And it's not like haven't been looked a little bit fragile at times this season. But United, as much of a in flow as they might be, they're not completely unbeatable. If you're playing them at home, I just felt like the choices to leave Odegaard and Udogie out, which, to be fair to Frank, a couple of weeks ago we wouldn't have been calling for it, but the way that they seem to dovetail so nicely against Copenhagen, particularly and with Xavi Simons as well, as what I think a lot of fans were disappointed not to see them starting. And to me, it comes from a place of trying to stop the opposition, as I said, and that was backed up by Frank's comments after the game, where he sort of really praised the defensive performance, side of the performance, and talked about limiting United's attack to just 5 shots, which is all valid. But again, to my mind, as much as he doesn't seem to agree, particularly when you keep asking him questions about the perception of how ambitious his side is tactically, that seems to be where he's at the moment. Maybe as a manager overall, or maybe because we're just at this stage of the development of this team, he is just pragmatic. He just wants to make sure they don't concede rather than score more often than not, I think, in games. And I can understand why that frustrates supporters. How do you see that? Or do you think that's what we talk about here?
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely agree. I have to say, like when I looked at the team sheet, you got to what have fans been asking for recently? They've been asking for the Palhinha Bentancur pivot to be broken up. That happened today. They played Palhinha and Sarr as the base 2. They've been asking for Xavi Simons to play at number 10. Okay, he has been for the last few games, but he played there again today. been asking for Brennan Johnson to be playing on the right, I think, because of his goal record, and he was there again. You're playing two strikers in Colomwani and Richarlison. Like, in terms of the bare bones of the players he picked, I didn't see it as a particularly sort of pragmatic, lineup that was designed to frustrate Man United. I can see the frustration.
I think the choice of Spence, as much as I really rate Spence as a great player, I think one of his biggest strengths is his one-to-one defending. That felt like he was chosen to go up against either Jallo, as it turned out to be, because Mbeumo was playing on the other side of the pitch for most of the game, or Mbeumo had he started there. And that, to my mind, with the Doggies' performance the other day, admittedly, he's just coming back from injury, and we know what he's been going through, off the pitch. So maybe that comes into it too. But that felt, for this game, a bit more sort of, like I say, to trying to stop the opposition rather than break them down. That would be the selection that I point to more than any.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid point. I would agree with that. On the specific example of Spence against Udogie, that did seem odd to me, because I thought it was so clear in midweek against Copenhagen what Udogie brought, to that performance, in terms of the width he offers, in terms of the kind of thrust, just the balance of the team, having the left footer there, the combinations with Xavi as well. I think what Udogie does is he pulls the team apart. And it was interesting when you sit in the press seats at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, is you're sort of in that area where the kind of left winger is, isn't it? Where you're sort of just ahead of the halfway line. And it was really noticeable to me, just in the sense of where Spence plays. He likes to have the game in front of him there. Like, he likes to have that ball played back to him, where with a right foot, he can turn inside and recycle it and go inside, or play a sort of nice little reverse pass. But he likes to do most of his work as an attacking left back in the sort of middle third of the opposition's half. Whereas when Udogie comes on, you notice just suddenly there's just a left back who wants to play 10 yards further forward. Like, he wants to play in that final quarter of the pitch where he can basically get to the line, pull balls back, do overlaps. And it was really noticeable to me that you suddenly had an extra dimension to Tottenham's attack down the left. And I have to say that I really thought that was obvious against Copenhagen. That when that happened, I thought, this is one of the key reasons why Spurs have won this match 4-0, and they're looking so much better, is because Udogie gives that balance on the left. And we know what Spence brings, in terms of his one-on-one defending, in terms of his composure on the ball. He's excellent at kind of playing out from the back and wriggling out of tight spaces. All of that stuff. He's got
excellent. Got a nice crossfield ball on him as well, hasn't he? Have you noticed that, Spence? When he wants to do a diagonal, he's pretty accurate with those. So that's also, he's got a lot of strength.
He has. Of course. I mean, this is why he's in the England squad. He's had a great 6 months, and he's a fantastic player. No one's not saying that, but I think Udogie brings a certain set of characteristics at this moment the team really needs. And I think Frank, I didn't hear it actually, but I think George said to me that Frank had said before the match that it was a selection decision. That there wasn't any, because I wondered whether it was a fitness thing, that maybe he was still a bit nervous with Udogie. It's his knee, isn't it? I think, playing kind of back-to-back matches midweek in the weekend. And obviously, of course, what you're saying about the case with his agent, etc. All of that. Did one of those factors play into it? We don't know. It's possible that Frank said it was selection, and actually he didn't want to say that it was actually something else. That could have been possible. But I agree. It felt like a move, if we take it at face value, that he was playing Spence because he anticipated that either Mbeumo, he clearly thinks is an absolute world beater, needed to be stopped 1v1, which is a fair assessment, or maybe even that Ahmad and that Spurs, that United are strong down the flanks, and therefore he wanted to play someone who was defensively strong there. And I agree. I think in that case, I think that was an oversight, and it was clear because Udogie came on in the second half, and him and Odegaard, I thought, transformed the match. Odegaard, I think and similarly with him, I thought he was excellent against Copenhagen. I think these two matches, I have to say, I've never been I wouldn't say I haven't been a fan of Odegaard, but I don't think I've really seen it, yet. Like, I've only seen it in glimpses. But I think for me personally, and maybe other supporters have seen it much more than I have, but I think, I'm sort of waking up to him almost in the last few days. Like, I think in these last two matches, I think his two contributions have been excellent, and they've really sort of made me think, actually, wow, like, this guy could be a real player for Spurs. I don't know if you felt like that as well watching him today.
Yeah, I was just about to say, cut yourself some slack, because I don't think he has shown it most of the time at Spurs. I don't think it's like, you're only just waking up to it. He's unfortunately been injured for a lot of that time. He's been adapting to the Premier League. I know he did play there with Burnley, but for a team like Spurs, he obviously had the game against Alkmaar. I think it was at home where he scored twice. That was his one big moment last season. That was all he really got out of the campaign, sadly because of injury. And he's got like I think Ange always used to talk about how he had something different to every other player he had. He's got that sort of it's not so much ability to beat a player, because Spurs now have Kudus, so he can do that too. It's just more a sort of poise on the ball, a bit of grace, dancing feet. I wouldn't say he's electric in terms of pace, but he's not slow either. But he just looks like quite a technically gifted footballer the more confidence he gets. And I think that's what we've seen in the last two games, actually. That side of his game. Also, along with a dovetailing with Udogie and Simons, who, as George pointed out, they were in the PSG academy together. I don't know whether they would have played together, because I think Simons is a couple of years older than Udogie, than Odegaard. But either way, there seems to be a sort of exciting partnership there, and that was kind of what I was referring to, and regarding team selection. Let's just quickly talk about the Mbeumo goal. Pretty clinically taken from Mbeumo. Great cross from Diallo with his weaker foot. Not the first right winger to put in a great left-footed cross, to be fair, in the game, because Johnson, as much as he got hammered for that, for some of his final ball in the Newcastle game, that cross was absolutely delicious with his left foot for Richarlison, who really should have done better. And I think Frank looked a bit he sort of mentioned it after the game, how things could have been different had he taken that chance. So I think that felt like a big opportunity. But anyway, Diallo swings it in, and Mbeumo gets between the defenders and clears it. But what did you make of it from a Spurs perspective? Was it just well taken from United, or are you mainly blaming Pape Sarr for not clearing it in the first instance?
Yeah, so it was a bad goal, I thought, because it was two mistakes in two sort of slightly different phases of play. Like, Sarr puts Van de Ven in trouble, with that pass where he, it's literally just one of those passes where it's like, you have it, you do something with it. And Van de Ven clearly wasn't expecting it, and he doesn't react well to it. But equally, I wouldn't really expect him to. If someone plays you a pass from 2 yards away in the box, like, you do naturally do that, don't you? Sort of like hack it, and he hacks it away. And that was the first mistake. And then I think what happened was Spurs kind of cleared it. And what I felt happened is it went out to the other side, to the right. And because they cleared it, it was that thing where I think they switched off. They sort of took a breath almost. They kind of like felt like, okay, we got away with that slightly, weird situation with Van de Ven and Sarr. And everyone sort of just relaxes a bit. And you look at the line there, it's so flat. Everyone, forms that line as if, okay, we're in the right position, but no one's looking. Everyone's just sort of taking a breath in the right position, but no one's actually looking around. No one's seeing where the runners are coming. And I think Johnson, and I particularly think it's Porro who basically loses the man at the back post. It's a great ball from Ahmad. You have to say that. He's got real quality on the ball, and to dig that cross out, I think it was with his left foot, to sort of find it at the back post. It was a nice moment of quality. But I think Frank will look at that goal and think that it was an avoidable goal to concede. But I have to say, I thought it was coming. I didn't think it came out of the blue. I think in that first half, I thought Spurs started pretty well in the first kind of 10 minutes. But United came on strong, and there was just a period of sort of 10, 15 minutes where Spurs didn't get out. They didn't really kind of make any headway up front. They didn't sort of actually get any control of the game. It felt like they were really sort of suddenly retreating further and further. And I felt like the goal was coming. So although it was an avoidable goal in itself, I wouldn't say United didn't deserve to be ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a great first half, particularly from Spurs' perspective. I don't think they really created much. All the sort of criticisms of Frank's side being a bit too pass it sideways, pass it backwards. I felt like there was quite a lot of that in this first half. And United were marginally better. They looked a bit more organised, albeit I think Patrick Dorgu had a contender for one of the worst long throws of the season so far, and his age of long throws was absolutely dreadful. But at half-time comes...
Very bad.
Really bad. Halftime comes and you're wondering what's he going to do. There was a sort of smattering of boos at halftime. I wouldn't say it was really, really vocal, but there was clear sort of frustration amongst the fan base. And he takes off Mawani, who afterwards it was a bit unclear exactly what the problem was. Once again, Frank was pretty vague over a player's fitness, but I think he said he had like a problem. And anyway, he took him off when I think a lot of us thought maybe
He said,
Richarlison.
Tommy, he said he was. So I was going to say, he said he was struggling, didn't he? And
struggling.
It was struggling with an issue, but it's not a big thing, I think is what he said. Yeah.
So exactly, pretty vague, as I was saying. And then Odegaard comes on.
It sounded physical, right? It didn't sound tactical. Like I asked the question, so that's why I remember. I said to him, "Was it tactical or was it physical?" And I think he said he was struggling with a thing, but it wasn't a big thing or something. So he didn't say it was tactical.
Right.
I think it was
pretty much. Yeah. So he comes off. I think it is a fitness thing, which is a shame because Moani, I thought, particularly against Copenhagen, showed some really nice touches. He didn't really get as much in the game here, and then obviously he was off at half time. But Odegaard comes on, and suddenly, and it's not just him, it's just Spurs all round look way more alive in the second half. They have a couple of good chances, and were it not for Seny Lemons, if you pronounce it right, the Man United goalkeeper, he made a couple of really good saves, didn't he? From Romero, I'm trying to remember the second one. There was another chance. Paulinho from the corner. Look, at first I thought it was a brilliant save, and then I watched it again and I thought, well, it is straight at him, so he should save it. But nonetheless, it was some really good reactions. The kind of thing we see from Vicario, to be honest, on a regular basis. But you could tell they were growing. But having said that, United looked fairly comfortable still. And then what comes next is Frank's decision to make a change, which goes down, let's be honest, like a bit of a lead balloon regarding Xavi Simons. And we'll just get into that. We'll have an ad break first, and then we'll come back into that, and we'll talk a bit about the change itself, what happened afterwards, but what it's sort of the atmosphere in the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, not just today, but on a regular basis, whether it's justified from the fans' perspective or whether it's kind of helping the opposition out. I think we've got some interesting takes on that. So we'll come back in 1 second. Okay, Tom. So we're talking about the decision, first of all, to take Xavi Simons off when you're 1-0 down and bring on Matthijs De Ligt. If you can pick it up from there, what happened next, Tom?
There were some boos, weren't there, generally, in the kind of second half. I think Spurs were playing quite well, actually, in that kind of first 10, 15 minutes. And they were having, I think, probably their best spell of the match, where they had 2 or 3 good openings. The crescendo of the game felt like it was going Spurs' way. I don't remember the real sort of order of events, but there was a sort of an injury. There were some subs, and everything kind of deflated a bit, didn't it, in the second half for sort of 10, 15 minutes. And at some point in the middle of that, I think, basically Xavi Simons goes off for Tel. And it's fair to say that, you were right. I think there were some boos at halftime, but not many. I always think in a huge stadium like the Spurs Stadium doesn't need many for you to hear them. And I didn't really think that was really noteworthy. But there's no doubt that when Xavi Simons came off and Tel was coming on, the boos there were fairly unanimous. It was definitely a sort of a sizable chunk of the stadium were booing that decision to bring off Xavi. And I guess, let's look at it positively for a very small second. Xavi was playing well, and I think he did play well in this game. It was the best I've seen him play. I've heard your pods recently, Tom, where you've kind of said, I think against Newcastle, you thought he had a good night. And I think he has been getting better. But I thought particularly in this game, I thought there were just more encouraging signs in the sense of his confidence. I liked the way he kind of looked like he wanted the ball more. I've seen in other games where I feel like he's slightly been looking like he's kind of second guessing himself, taking too long over decisions, just looking nervous, looking generally kind of skittish and jittery, whereas I felt like he was much more authoritative in this game. I don't know whether it was the man of the match award, which he probably didn't deserve in the week, but he did play well, but Van de Ven should have got it. Or whether it was just a good performance against Copenhagen, whatever it is, I felt like he played well. And I can see why Spurs fans were thinking, we're 1-0 down. Why are you taking off number 10, who is playing really well? I do think there is also a case, because there was a moment just before he came off, wasn't there, where he kind of, I think, carried the ball on the counter-attack. There weren't many options, and he kind of ran out of A options and B gas, and he kind of the ball got taken off him. And I wonder if Frank sort of thought, he's running out. He's played a lot this week. He's not 100% match fit yet. And I think he's probably tired. I think there was a case for him coming off. And let's be honest, it was proven correct because Tell scored the equaliser,
Yeah.
And whatever you think about Tell and whatever you think about he's done for Spurs, ultimately the decision was proven right. I also just think generally, and I think we spoke about this, me and George, after the Chelsea game, that I think the discontent in the stadium, I think, was pretty understandable last weekend when Spurs were so poor at home and their XG and everything and a lack of chances. I have to say, I thought the fans in this game was slightly too ready to grumble and groan. I thought there were quite a few moments where things kind of broke down and the fans really were very vocal about their disappointment. And I just thought they're 1-0 down to Man United and they're playing okay, in the second half. They're playing quite well, in fact, and they're actually kind of getting back into this game. Are those fans who are booing this substitution, are they helping? Are they helping Spurs kind of come back and get a point? And I remember Frank saying in the press conference last week, didn't he? He said, that sometimes that kind of momentum, that swell that the fans can provide, that can be the difference. When you're 1-0 down, you score a goal, that's a point, and that point can be can be crucial in the Premier League. And I thought that was another example today. And I just sort of, all the usual asterisks. Of course, the fans, they pay their money. They have complete within their rights to make their opinion known. I just don't know if it's helpful. I don't think it's a strength for Spurs at the moment. I think teams are going to the Spurs stadium not only thinking they can win at the moment, but thinking that the fans are actually something they can use to get results. I think the Tottenham fans should understand that. Go ahead.
Well, this is what I was going to come in with. So, first of all, obviously, it's a lot of money at Tottenham. So fans, as you rightly say, do have the right to air their opinions. But what was interesting is I was sitting next to my colleague who covers Man United every week, and he was sort of pointing out there's just this feeling, to him at least, and it seems like to other fans of other clubs, of you're just sort of waiting for the fans to get on the Spurs team back. And I hadn't really thought of it that way. I definitely seen other sides have that. Newcastle back in the Mike Ashley era, that would often be the case, and it would end up, whilst that amazing crowd that you can get at St James's Park can be the 12th man, it can really, really not help you when it's not going well. And I haven't really thought of that with Spurs. And sometimes it takes someone who doesn't, isn't in the hurly-burly, the thick of it every week to come in and make an observation that makes you go, yeah, you might be onto something a little bit. And it's just kind of what you're saying. I wonder if there is this feeling, at least at the moment, that for other opposing teams, they can just be patient and frustrate, and then know that the home crowd might start to get frustrated, and that can play a part in turning the tide. Ironically, that didn't happen in the end in this game, but obviously it was only last week against Chelsea where we saw Spence and Van der Ven coming off and getting super frustrated. And it sounds like based on what Frank said afterwards, it wasn't just the performance and the result, it was the fans booing them as well. So I'm with you. I think it's always difficult to actually criticize supporters, particularly ones that pay their hard-earned and very high fees to get in to watch Spurs. But I wonder, more sort of opening the debate really, particularly for anyone who comments on Spotify or on YouTube or any emails that come in. Love to hear your thoughts really. Are the Spurs fans at times not helping the team, or is this really just what their own right to make their views heard when they're watching football, particularly at the moment when they're finding at home it to be quite a tough watch, which as a neutral I have to agree at times it has been, even with the caveat that he's obviously changing so much and trying to shore up the defence that was so leaky last season.
Amorim said it, didn't he, in the press conference afterwards? He said we should have sensed the environment, and the game was there for the taking, basically. And I was in no doubt that he basically, meant that we should have realised that the atmosphere was turning sour and that we were on top in the game, and that all we needed to do was hold on, really, and see it out, because the crowd were not behind the team. The team were unravelling, I think, and that's what we've seen, I think, from Tottenham already in this early days of Frank. Is when they've conceded, they haven't reacted well. they haven't responded. We've seen quite a lot of the time they've sort of melted under the pressure. And I think that there's a combination there. I don't think that's clearly not just about the supporters. I think it's also about the team. But I don't think the atmosphere helps. I think when they're 1-0 down, I think they suddenly seem to go into themselves. Carragher did a very scathing report, didn't he, on Monday Night Football, where he basically accused a lot of the Spurs players of hiding. And I think that sort of lack of confidence at the moment, particularly at home, I think is not helped by the atmosphere. And I think it's an interesting one. Maybe we'll get into it kind of, during the international break. But what is it? Is it the style? Of course, they're unhappy with the sort of the way Spurs are playing at the moment. I think that can be understandable. Is it sort of post-Ange, post-Europa League win, that there's sort of a lack of, I'm wondering, is there sort of a lack of a vision at the moment? Are fans sort of wondering, what is this season for? What are we aiming for at the moment? What are we actually wanting to achieve this season? Is there a little bit of Arsenal, the way how Arsenal are doing so brilliantly at the moment? What are all these things that kind of feed into the fact that here we are after, 18 games? That Spurs are sort of in the top. What are they tonight, Tom? I don't know. Somewhere in the top 6, are they? Must be. That Spurs fans are already so unhappy. I understand the slight unhappiness. I would understand the slight grumbling and the discontent with the kind of the way they're playing. Of course, I think we'd all say that there have been, some performances this season that have been, well below par. But what is it about the atmosphere at the moment that makes kind of journalists coming from other teams and other clubs and go, oof, I didn't realise it was this bad. And I heard that a lot today. I heard that from 4 or 5, colleagues who don't cover Spurs regularly and said, I'm surprised that it's this bad, this early under Frank.
Yeah, I've just looked at the league table. They're actually third as we speak. Obviously, there's games to happen this weekend, and it's pretty concertinaed, so that can easily drop down. But take it back to Xavi. I've said before, I've been quite critical of his early performances. I understand he's been adapting to a new league. It's more like the carelessness in play, the sort of loose passes that have really frustrated me for someone who's clearly so technically gifted. I don't feel like that's. I feel like those were, to a certain extent, inexcusable, rather than just not making much of an impact on the game. But he clearly was really good, I thought, against Copenhagen. Unlucky to come off when Johnson gets sent off. He's used that confidence has grown, and I thought we saw that today. I thought generally, whilst he's not. It's not like talking about other fans or journalists of other teams. It's not that they're going to be watching Spurs today and thinking, well, that's Xavi Simons, what a player he is. He's not at that level. But when you've watched him go through those struggles early in his Tottenham career, it's nice to watch him, that confidence starting to flow through him, to be demanding the ball off other teammates and not having to watch the ball into his foot like it almost felt like he did just a few games ago. I mean, funny enough, listening back to your Chelsea reaction podcast, which was a mere week ago, you were essentially saying get him out of the team because he's not helping his teammates, and it was a justified comment, I felt, based on the performance. So it shows you how quickly things can change. And on that note, funny enough, after the Chelsea performance, because it was so bad and the reaction to it was so strong, it felt like it was a real mood shift in the Thomas Frank era, which was quite concerning, to the point where we were looking ahead to the Man United game at the weekend thinking, there seem to be a few parallels here between the Nuno Espirito Santo time in charge. And then they go and win against Copenhagen. They don't just win, and they don't just win by a big scoreline, but they absolutely demolish them. And yes, Copenhagen clearly aren't a great team, but it was just what the doctor ordered for that performance, and kind of shifted that narrative to a certain extent. And they obviously got a point today, but take it back to Nuno when he made that Xavi Simons sub. And in fact, it was just before it, because I had friends who were in the stadium and watching on the TV, who were big Spurs supporters, who could see it coming. And I got a message straight through on my phone almost before the sub happened, saying, this is his Nuno moment. This is his Lucas Moura against Man United coming off for Steven Bergwijn. I had to read up on that, because in my head, Lucas Moura wasn't like the playmaking genius, but I do remember having a moment when the sub happened and the fans really took against it. I think Moura was clearly in a bit of a good moment himself during that period. But that was the sort of reaction at the time. And I mean, how did you see it? Did you think this is like another, before it went on to pay off, which it clearly did you see it as almost like, oh, this is, for a manager who seems to not exactly have everyone on side, this is a big risk doing this kind of thing at this juncture with you 1-0 down?
I thought it was brave, and I think what I quite like about Frank so far is that he doesn't make decisions to please people. He's not a people pleaser, and we've seen that so far. I think, he makes rotations bravely as well. There've been quite a few rotations I think this season when people have said, why is he not playing him? Why is he resting him in this game? And I like that about him. I do, and you're absolutely right to say that me and George last weekend were basically saying we felt like Xavi was bringing the vibe down, and he was, because the fans were getting on his back so much, and he was giving the ball away so much that it felt like he was almost dictating the atmosphere, and fair play, because Frank has stuck with it, and maybe you'd say, okay, well, there's a huge signing there, but he keeps picking him, and he keeps on trusting him. And I guess against Copenhagen, he actually didn't. He came on, right? So, in a way, he wasn't in that starting lineup. Maybe the plan all along was to kind of rest him in midweek and then play him in this game. So I quite liked it. I don't know. I maybe there's a sort of slightly part of it is Tell. Was it as much that Tell was coming on as well? That we know that fans don't particularly love Tell at the moment. Maybe that was part of it as well. But I think Frank is brave in that sense, and I know fans will say, well, he's not brave enough when it comes to his tactics. But I think he's sure of himself, and I think that's what you need as a manager. You have to have conviction, because ultimately half the argument is convincing the players that you know what you're doing, that you believe in what you're doing. And I like that he makes those sort of decisions, unapologetically. And I think with Xavi, and I liked your description there, and I think one thing I liked about him particularly was the way he was coming deeper to get on the ball today. I thought, he was coming back into the kind of, a bit like Maddison does this as well sometimes, where when he's feeling good about himself, he comes back and he gets the ball off the back four and he says, give it to me, I'll dictate the game from deep as well, and sometimes I think number 10s quite like to do that. We see Harry Kane do it as well, don't we, for England, for example, in a slightly different way. But when they're sort of feeling good about their game, they basically kind of want to be involved all over the pitch. And I saw that from Xavi today more than ever. I think in most of his matches so far, he's sort of been looking for the little pockets, which is really hard spaces to find. Whereas today, I think he was everywhere. He was really trying to get on the ball from all positions. And I really liked that about his game. I mean, ultimately, Tom, Frank's changes transformed the match, didn't they? That's the bottom line, and we can argue about whether or not he got the starting lineup right. And I saw, people were messaging on social and saying, he should have played Odegaard and Udogie from the start. Okay, I take that point. But ultimately, midway through the second half, Spurs didn't look like scoring. They didn't look like getting back in the game. And Udogie and Odegaard and Tell changed the match. And they get Spurs what was very nearly a victory and actually was a point. And at the end of a week, which I think has been a really important week for them to have this result and this performance. So we can argue all day about whether it was the right thing or not. It was the right thing, because if he hadn't made those changes, they would have lost the game. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean, after the game, he was obviously asked a few tough questions about the booing. He sort of ignored that to a certain extent, but he just said, "Look, every change I make for one aim, and that's to try and win the game." And you can't really argue with that. As you rightly point out, you can't really argue with the changes because they did pay off. I want to sort of finish in a minute, actually, about the forwards. So I'll briefly describe the goals for anyone who hasn't seen them. Tell obviously comes on, brilliant touch and finish, deflected finish, but I thought it was really, really impressive. And he said afterwards, I think, that he'd been working on that in training, which was encouraging to see. And then Richarlison gets the little flick from an Odegaard shot. I think he's having a shot, to be honest. But I think Richarlison means it and then runs off, run his shirt off. But before we come back to the choice of forwards, let's just talk briefly about the goal that ended up costing them the win. De Ligt. Romero had gone off at this point. He said, I asked Frank afterwards about it. He said he was just done physically. He's just come back from injury. And he wasn't apparently going to be marking De Ligt, basically. He wasn't going to be in that position. He was going to be in a central area of the defending the corner. So Frank's saying, basically that made no difference to the goal that they conceded. But obviously Spurs, along with their defensive solidity most of the time, set pieces have been, the big narrative of their season so far, how much they pride themselves on it. Andreas Georgesson, both from an attacking and defensive point of view. How disappointed do you think that the coaching staff are going to be that they've essentially drop 2 points here through a set piece.
Yeah, gutting, I think. And we shouldn't forget that Sesko was off. So Spurs were playing 11 against 10 or I don't know. Did they score both of their goals against 10 men? Or did they score only one or only the second? I'm not sure. I think they were playing 11 against 10. Basically, Sesko, and we should also not forget to mention that Sesko had a great chance, didn't he? To make it 2-0. It was Van de Ven's brilliant tackle.
I thought it was 1-1 at that point. I think that was between the two, unless I'm getting it wrong. I think that was after.
You might be right.
I think it was after Talad equalised. But yeah, I mean, Van de Ven, who obviously apparently that image of him in the Europa League final of clearing off the line has actually been put outside the Spurs dressing room now in the home. I was asking the other day whether, the photos that Ange kept talking about, apparently there are a bunch of them near the home dressing room, and one of them is the iconic image of Van de Ven, head over heels clearing it off the line. But obviously, and he was there to the rescue again, and only really one defender in the Premier League probably would have got back in that position to make that kind of tackle. So fair play to him. But yeah, so to carry on, I mean the goal itself to concede, as you say, it's a bitter blow right at the end of the game, isn't it?
Yeah, because basically, so Sesko's off, and you have De Ligt and you have Yoro, right? They're sort of the two big kind of contact ballers that United still have on. And Spurs, how have they let De Ligt really, have that? I mean, it's a good header, a towering jump, of course, but how have they let him have that space at the back post? I really don't understand how that's happened. And you asked a good question, Tom, in the press conference where basically you said to Frank, was Romero being off? Was that problematic for the organisation of that set piece, basically? And he sort of batted it away, didn't he? And kind of said, well, actually, Romero doesn't defend that area or something, and therefore it wouldn't have made any difference. But you have to say they didn't deal with it well. And you know what, as well, there was another point. It was before United won that corner. Spurs won the ball back. And I think it was Bentancur. They had the chance, basically, to kind of play the ball forward, launch kind of what probably almost certainly would have been the kind of final attack, take the ball up in the corner, you win the game. I think it was Bentancur, and I feel bad if it wasn't, because I'm criticising this point. Where basically they give the ball away with a really careless ball that just basically hands the pass back to Man United. And it was from that attack that United then got the corner, and it's those tiny details, in those moments where just that one pass is all you need really there to kind of consolidate possession and to give the ball away then and give away a corner. I sort of want Vicario to be more dominant in that position. I don't know if that's unfair. I'm not saying that, with maximum confidence, because I think it was a good corner and everyone's now, and Spurs love that corner to the back post, the sort of long ranging kind of Declan Rice swinger to the back post. Someone nods it either across or straight in. It's it is the corner that everyone's going for at the moment. I always just think in that position, when your team are on the back foot in the last moments of the game, you want your goalkeeper basically to say, whatever happens, I'm coming and getting the ball and I'm going to claim it and I'm going to give everyone a big sigh of relief. And I never really felt like Vicario was going to do that when that ball, went over the top of him. But yeah, it was a soft goal to concede. And I think Frank will be furious about that, because Spurs have been good from set pieces this season, defensively particularly. So I think that was a real hammer blow for him.
They have, but you rightly point out, I was thinking the same thing. They're not the only team that is doing that. Spurs, as you say, themselves have gone for the back post one, as we saw when Bentancur shouldered it back across for Van de Ven against Everton. But a lot of games I'm watching at the moment, it's weird. Like, why is it so hard to defend? Why are teams not wising up to it when it seems like most games, or I'm watching anyway, someone is going for that kind of attempt? And on Vicario, I agree, but again, other teams are having the same issues. And one thing I will say about Vicario, and this is probably in praise of both him, Andreas Georgsson, and Thomas Frank's coaching staff, is we don't seem to, as much as you've just mentioned it there, I don't think we've been really talking much about his vulnerability or previous vulnerability at set pieces like we were constantly during the Ange era. And that is credit to everyone, all those people I mentioned in improving that, even though ultimately maybe that played a part in them not winning today. Just lastly, I want to talk about the forwards, and I want to talk about Solanke at the end, because we were in the press conference the other day, and we should probably just talk about his response to my question about when he might be back. But obviously Muani starts, Richarlison starts, Muani comes off, Richarlison scores, Tell scores. But, one of your questions, which sometimes I feel like he doesn't take that kindly to when it comes to tactical questions, he actually sort of conceded it was quite a fair point, that it seems like he's constantly trying to search for the answer and changing approaches mid-game, particularly in his attacking, in his attack, and it just hasn't quite landed on it yet. Where do you see, Park Solanke for a second, the options that Spurs have got at the moment? How many out of Richarlison, Tell, and Muani do you really see the answer in the long term for Tottenham?
Yeah, I was actually looking at this during the game today because I wasn't on a kind of on the whistle report duty. So I was sort of painstakingly going through all of his matches and trying to work out how many combinations he's used. And I make it that I've got it up here. I make it that in 17 games, he's now used 14 different attacking combinations. And that's across left wing, right wing, striker, number 10.
Is that,
and I mean,
personnel? Or is that system
that's
as
just
well?
personnel, and you know what? That's just starting lineups. Like, that's not even including changes within games. I mean, today there were 3 or 4 changes, to the personnel of that front four. And that's between 9 players. So that's between Johnson, Simons, Richarlison, Kolo Muani, Odegaard, Kudus, Sarr, and Bergvall, who both played advanced at sort of number 10, 2 or 3 times each, and Tell. Those are the 9 players. And you can basically rotate those players between the 4 positions. They've all had a go in basically every single position.
But couldn't you, just to play devil's advocate before you get into it, I mean, on rotation, that's what modern football is. I mean, look at United today. Sesko comes on, you didn't start the game, and Mbumu changed position. So I don't know. I mean, or is that's a valid point? But this is going further than that. It's not just.
I think you can rotate people, but we don't know who. We don't know any. You name me any of those players, and you ask me what's their best position. I mean, I'd say 6 or 7 of them we don't know. And that's the thing. It's not that Johnson, is rotating brilliantly with, I don't know, Kudus or whatever, or that, on the left wing it's definitely Richarlison and definitely Odegaard, and they're rotating. We don't know. Like, do we think that Richarlison is better on the left or up front in a Frank system? Do we think Kolo Muani is better up front or on the left? We've seen both. Do we think? Xavi we think is better centrally, but he's also played left. Johnson has played both sides. Sarr played today at pivot. He's also played at 10, and we quite like him as a pressing 10. Bergvall has played left, advanced, and base. We've seen Tell play up front. Don't think we've seen him play left, to be fair. I mean, and I don't blame Frank for this. As you know, my general kind of stance on this is that Frank is trying everything. He's trying all of these players in different positions, in different combinations. He's moving the chessboard around, trying to work out how to get checkmate, but ultimately he's only got pawns. He hasn't got any queens, and he hasn't got any knights. He hasn't got enough talent available on the board to basically do what he wants to do. And I personally think that is his problem right now. And you look at, I think I said this before, you look at Richarlison, you look at Odegaard, if you like, you look at Kolo Muani today, the current version of Kolo Muani, it's a weaker front three than what Frank had at Brentford last season. And people were saying, is Frank a big time manager? Can he play? Can he get Spurs playing the Spurs way at Spurs? Let's be honest. The Spurs front three is worse than the front three he had at Brentford last season with Visser and Mbuma. So, I mean, until Xavi Simons becomes the Xavi Simons we hope he will become, until Kolo Muani becomes, the Kolo Muani people hope he's going to become, ultimately Spurs have signed 2, promising players in the summer transfer window, and they've got a bunch of others who are promising players who haven't really delivered yet, and that's his task, that is his challenge. And maybe you say, okay, that's his job to make these players better. But he hasn't got superstars. He hasn't got Kane, Son, Kulusevski, Maddison, Christian Eriksen, Dele Alli. He hasn't got those players. Spurs have been declining in these positions for years and years, and this is where we're at, and that is the challenge for him. And I don't think I think the criticism you can level at Frank is, at this point, 3 months in, are we any closer to knowing, what the best front three is? If there was a cup final tomorrow, a Europa League final or whatever, Champions League semi-final, let's say, what would he play? I don't know. And I don't think he knows either.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. What I was going to say, so first of all, I feel a bit guilty sort of hammering him too much over this because it was only a few games ago, particularly the good start, where I was praising him for being a sort of horses for courses manager who mixes it up. But I suppose it's particularly the home games where maybe he needs to just stick with something, but I don't even know what that is at this stage. And maybe, yeah, it's a difficult one. I do think fundamentally it does come back down to quality of players. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the players will never be good enough. Xavi Simons is a prime example. He's clearly improving this week, but he's not the player that, if this is it, he's not that good. But we're hoping that this is the start of him improving to be the player that he will be one day. But back to my original question, and I think you kind of hinted at it with your porn analogy, chess analogy, that you don't rate these really long term, these three forwards that we mentioned, or maybe that's unfair on Tell because he's so young.
I think a lot of these players, we don't know where they're going to be in a year or 2 or 3 years' time. I don't think any of us can write them off because they're all young. They've all got their careers well ahead of them, but that's not a great recipe for finishing in the top 4 this season, is it? You can have potential, but ultimately, if you want to deliver now and you want to get in the top 4 or 5 as it stands, that's a difficult job to pull off. It is a difficult job to pull off. And today I thought it was pretty stark because you had in the red shirts, you had Cunha, who United spent 62.5 million on, who was brilliant for Wolves in the Premier League last season, ready to go. You have Mbumo, 71 million, bought from the Premier League, ready to go. And you're playing against Kolo Muani, who's still getting match fitness, and Xavi Simons, who's still getting used to the Premier League. And we're in the middle of November. And that is the difference in the moment. That is the difference, and it hasn't cost Tottenham in terms of points, particularly because Man United are still basically on the same points as Tottenham, aren't they, in the league? But it's cost them in terms of feeling and vibe, isn't it? And it's cost them in terms of their performances at the moment. They're still trying to find the right blend. They're still trying to find their feet. Combinations aren't right. And of course, we know the extenuating circumstances. Clearly the Solanke injury has been hugely damaging. I think Richarlison today was, he worked hard, did his best, but it was just so obviously one of those performances I felt that you take him off after 60 minutes because you just say, okay, it's just not working for him today. And I don't think it really was. And it's ironic because obviously he scores the goal in the end. But actually, I think, a team like Spurs should have an option there where they bring someone on for him. And I think Solanke is being missed so much in terms of his link-up play and what he brings in terms of goals. And then clearly, Kulusevski and Maddison as well, they're massive misses. So there are extenuating circumstances. But, I also want to say, I think that Odegaard, I thought, was so good today off the bench. His contribution, I thought, was so impressive that it made me think, would you start Odegaard against Arsenal after the international break?
Arsenal away. I know Sunderland have just got a point out of them and finally scored a goal against them, but that game looks so difficult, doesn't it? I suppose Spurs, they beat them in pre-season. Not that counts when Sarr scored that wonder goal, but I want to see Odegaard play. But is that the game? That feels like the game to try and be super pragmatic. Away at the Emirates, that's one where I think most Spurs fans will be absolutely fine with that. What does that mean? Playing Xavi off the left, which I don't think's really worked either. So if he's got it in him to be disciplined enough down that left-hand side, then yeah, and there aren't really that many other options, and he was very good off the bench. To take it back to Solanke, I want to hear your thoughts actually on his response to the question on Friday. So I asked him in the embargo section with Solanke, obviously this injury's been going on for ages. We'd hoped he was going to be back, after the last international break, and already a week ago or so, Frank said it definitely won't be till after this coming international break. I asked him first of all, is there any chance that he could play in this friendly that Dragozin is going to play in? To try and get match minutes in the same way that Muani played 45 minutes in a friendly behind closed doors in the last international break, and he basically ruled that out, said it was unlikely. then I said, well, look, we're not far away from the turn of the year, effectively. I mean, can fans expect him to be back effectively before 2026? Is that a fair sort of expectation? And he said, I hope so. But he didn't give, to my mind, the most convincing answer on that. And maybe he's just trying to be as honest as possible. But when you heard his response, were you thinking, this feels like this is not in any way close to being resolved?
I think that's a good summary of how you feel most of the time when Frank talks about fitness news. It's just a minor thing. I have to say my view, I think, was just that he's probably now feeling so kind of wary of over promising on Solanke that maybe his first instinct there, when you asked, will he be back for 2025, was just to sort of be like, yeah, I think so, but I don't want to say 100%, because I don't want to put pressure on. Or I guess that was my first reaction, was that maybe it was just kind of the instincts of a slightly nervous manager at the moment, particularly with Solanke, because they've obviously kind of, it's been a minor thing for 2 or 3 months, and the surgery was meant to be minor, and there was sort of hope that he would come back quickly after the last international break. Didn't happen, so it's clearly been a bit of a minefield. I think that, we don't know, let's be honest, we don't know. And judging injuries is always, from outside is a complete mug's game, because they have all the data, they have all the knowledge. We don't know, let's be clear. But it does feel like they're hoping, isn't it, that this 2-week international break now is going to be a decisive point where he's going to, after the break, I think they're hoping they can get him on the bench, fairly quickly, and get him on the pitch. I think there is a sense with Solanke that he will be ready to go quite quickly, that, it's not a matter clearly that he's going to start straight away. But I don't think it's the same thing, for example, as Colin Mwani, where it's like, okay, he's going to need like a month or so to kind of get up to speed. I think they think that athletically and physically he's in quite a good place, like in terms of his fitness, because he was around for the most of pre-season, right? Like, so I don't think it's going. I think it's like an injury in the middle of the season where he will need a couple of games on the bench, come on for 20 minutes, half an hour, then be ready for a start, I think. But I don't know. Did you were you more pessimistic than me about that?
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah, I'd be surprised. If anything, I think he said the other day that it's going to be a bit of time, even when he's back, before he's, in tip-top shape and starting regularly. Maybe
he said, because I asked the question, I said, yeah, Tom, I said, like, will he be ready to start straight away? And he said, well, a footballer who's been out for 2 or 3 months will never be ready to start straight away. It will be a case of him being on the bench once or twice and then kind of hoping that, so he didn't say at that point, oh, when he comes back, he's going to need another, few weeks to get up to speed. Okay. It was more like, yeah, of course, he's going to have to be on the bench a couple of times.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I'm just going off just generally how football seems to work. After an injury like that, it often just takes a while, and we're getting to the point now where, I don't know. I mean, January transfer market's coming along. I wonder if, I'm sure there'll be lots of fans calling for Ivan Toney or another centre forward. I'm not saying that's what Spurs are going to do with their options they've got. I'd almost be surprised. But it is a concern. I mean, we should probably look to wrap it up. Is there anything else, particularly related to the Man United game, that you want to mention, Tom?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I thought it was a good game. People on TV were saying it was dreary, and you're right. The Europa League, it was slightly reminiscent of that, but almost in reverse, wasn't it? Kind of United got their own kind of scrappy early-ish goal, and then were sort of sitting back and challenging Spurs to create the chance, just like Spurs did in the final. But no, nothing more. I think we've covered it all, and I think we'll be back basically with this international break we're going to do a Q&A pod in the next 2 or 3 days. I think on Monday, actually, we're lining that up, aren't we? Because we've got some really good emails and really good kind of comments and questions. Lots of people have been getting in touch with us with various things, which we haven't had time to get to, but we'll definitely do a really good Q&A pod early this week. And yeah, that's probably next on the lineup, isn't it? So if you're listening and watching on YouTube, please do give us a like and a subscribe. Really helps us, and check us out on all the socials. And yeah, look forward to getting to that.
Yeah, got to help us out on TikTok. Poor Marcus, he's set up a TikTok, and I think he's got about 30 followers now. So it is growing, just at sort of a sort of glacial speed. So anyone who's on there, please get on it. And particularly with that Q&A pod, let's hear some more fresh comments off the back of this, both on YouTube, emails, all those different places, so we can discuss them during the week, definitely. But after what was a topsy-turvy 2-2 draw against Man United, where I think a lot of fans have left not quite sure how to feel, whether they were relieved or frustrated, perhaps both in equal measure. That pretty much wraps it up from both myself and Tom. And we'll speak to you in the week. Cheers, guys.
Cheerio.